Ну что же, добрый вечер, дорогие друзья. Я рад снова всех вас приветствовать на фестивале Go Viral. Сегодня первый день фестиваля, и на данный момент мы успели уже послушать двух киноу-спикеров. Это Брэндона Эндрюса, а также Самсона Безмятежного. Ну а сейчас у нас будет очередная лекция от Радхики Мальпани из США, который расскажет нам, как создавать и масштабировать отличные продукты и компании, а также команды, и поделится 20-летним опытом работы в компании Google. Радхика имеет более чем 30-летний опыт работы в техническом секторе. Она работала в таких компаниях, как Siemens, Hewlett-Packard и Google. На протяжении 20 лет, которых она работала в Google, она была директором инженерно-технического отдела и отвечала за запуск в производство и масштабирование огромного ряда видов продуктов, которые имели большое и важное значение. Она всегда уделяла большое внимание и применению технологий в социальной сфере. Недавно Радхика покинула компанию Google, чтобы всецело посвятить себя помощи новообразованным компаниям. Итак, господа, Радхика Мальпани.
Okay. Hi, I'm Radhika Mальпани.
Radhika, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. It's great to hear you. Radhika, good evening or good afternoon. Where are you at the moment?
It's actually early morning. I'm in California. It is 8 in the morning.
Oh, so good morning. I'm hoping you're having a great morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for having time to speak to our viewers and share your expertise, your really valuable expertise of your field of work. Well, from now on, the floor is yours, Radhika. You can start.
Okay, can I share my slides?
Yes, sure.
Okay, let me just get that working. Give me a second. Okay, so tell me if you can see my slides.
Now you can, I think you can turn, yes, sure.
You can see my slides, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Then I will start. So hello, Go Viralers. My name is Radhika Mальпани, and I'm here to talk about what it takes to build world-class products and teams. Okay, it's just slow. Got it. Okay, so a little bit about the plan for today. I'm going to start with telling you a little bit about myself, my career, what I've done, why I'm giving this talk. And then I'm going to share some of my experiences from, over 30 years in the industry, 20 years at Google. My hope is that it'll give you some insights and some practical advice that you could use in your own career. So at the end of this talk, I'm hoping, when you go out to build your own products, you'll have some advice, some insights into how to think about, what to build and why, how do you go about building it? How do you know you're on the right path? When you're ready to scale, what does it take to scale? And, I'm hoping you'll have some tools that could help you at different parts, at different stages. So let's start. Who am I? I'm an engineer by training. I've been a senior director of engineering at Google. I'm an entrepreneur at heart, right? I love building products, and I've always built products and teams from scratch. So when I joined Google, it was tiny. We were 30 engineers, and so I pretty much worked on all the core products. Starting with, I started on the early ad system. Then I built a lot of the back-end web search, started Google Local Search. Then I started Google Images, and I built that for 8 years, growing it to like over 1 billion queries a day, growing it to teams on 3 continents. And then I spent the next 8 years building Google Travel. But lately, feeling like I wanted to do more. I wanted to help make the world a better place. Right? And I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but that's really what I wanted. And so I decided what I was going to do was take my learnings from my time in Silicon Valley, from my time working with a bunch of startups and apply that, my experience building products and teams, apply that to the impact sector. And so now that's what I do now. I quit Google last year, about a year ago, and I work full-time with founders of mission-driven startups, advising them on anything from tech strategy, product strategy, org strategy, scaling, whatever they need. And the other thing I'm doing is I teach entrepreneurship. And so with a couple of colleagues, Stanford prof and UC Santa Cruz prof, this spring, we started a class called Hacking for Oceans, where we're basically teaching entrepreneurship focused on solving the ocean problems. So that's why I'm here today, to share my learnings in the hope that it might be useful. And sorry, I'm just going to start a timer so I can keep track of time there. Okay, so let's start. What made Google so special and helped us succeed? And I think it came down to 4 pillars that I think apply to pretty much any company. And, when you think about them, they are quite obvious. The first is a very clear mission, knowing exactly what we were doing and why, an empowered top-notch team, laser focus on our users, on our customers, right? And a strong culture. And we combined those 4 with some really innovative processes to support scaling. And like I said, if you think about it, these are kind of obvious. I'm going to dig deeper into them and maybe share examples from Google to make it clearer and hope that's useful. But before I do more, I just want to check with the studio. You guys can see my slides and hear me clearly? Just give me a thumbs up, studio. You can hear me clearly, right? Okay, good. So let's start. First pillar, mission. What do I mean by mission? I mean, the problem, what you're working on, why you're doing what you do. Mission really matters. What you work on matters, right? It's got to address a real user pain point. And it shouldn't be incremental. It needs to be something radical so that it actually has value to the users. So if you take Google, our mission was to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. So at that time, the World Wide Web was already growing by leaps and bounds, and it was hard to find reliable information, right? So if I put in a query, I'd get all these pages with, relevant results, but I couldn't tell who I could trust. So clearly that was a real user pain point. How do I find reliable information? And then the radical thing we did was we introduced this concept of PageRank, which is where you determine the authoritativeness of a web page, right? So now when I put in a query, a page from Stanford would rank higher than, some random Tom's page. And so that's what made Google work. Clear pain point and radical change. So let me give you a couple of examples at Google where I think we failed because we didn't do one of these. Take Google Glass. So when Google Glass came out, there was a lot of hype around it. We were sure we were going to change the world, the way humans interacted with the physical world. But the problem was it didn't really address a specific pain point, and it was expensive. So, users just ignored it. Nobody bought it, right? No specific pain point. Now, actually, they're relaunching with a specific pain point. They're focusing on doctors and surgery. Another product that, wasn't very successful was Google+. Now that's a clear pain point. Humans are social, we need to connect with each other, but Facebook already existed. And nothing Google+ did was radically different. There wasn't a radical innovation compared to Facebook. I mean, there were some changes like Google Circles, but those weren't actually changes based on pain points users had. And so, people never changed and came to Google+. So how do you figure out what to work on, right? And honestly, inspiration can come from anywhere. The trick is being ready to recognize it. So personally, in my case, often I found inspiration from my own personal problems. So for example, when I started Google about, early on, my daughter was 4 years old and I wanted to find a gymnastics class for her. Right? And it was really hard to do that. And I realized then that this was a general problem that I assumed more people had, which was finding local real world services. And so that's how local search started. Sometimes, you get inspiration by using your expertise to a different domain. So again, pretty early on, one of the engineers at Google, Paul, he wanted to find something in search algorithms, and he built an index on his email to find what he was looking for. And then he came to us and said, people search the web. Why don't we help them search their own personal email? And so that's how Gmail was born. And sometimes it's just passion about a particular domain. So like in my case, I love traveling. And about 8 years ago, I was trying to plan a trip to Greece. And my favorite travel author, Rick Steves, he didn't have a book to Greece at that time. And so I said, you know what, I do search, I'll go to Google and I'll plan my trip on Google. But it turned out to be really hard. There was so much information. I couldn't tell what was junk, what was good, who could I trust. And I realized what I was looking for was for someone authoritative. My apologies. I was looking for someone authoritative to tell me, yeah, you want to go to Greece? Here's where you go. Here's what you should do. And then I was thinking about it and I realized that at Google, we knew what people searched for. We knew what websites they read and spent time on. We knew where people took photographs from Google Photos. We also knew where people actually went in the real world because we had location history on Android. So I realized we could build an authoritative, this is what the world says you should do typically when you go to Greece, right? And so that's how Google Travel was started. So really what I'm saying is inspiration can come from many places. And once you have that idea, the next thing you need to do is you have to validate that problem. Is it just your problem? Do a lot of people have the problem? Is it a big problem? Like if you solve it, will your customers come running to you? And the best way to do that is to go out and talk to lots and lots of people. So when my mission for local search was help people find local real world services, right? And so I went and talked to people around me and said, do you guys have a problem? And I heard across the board, yeah, sometimes I need to find a plumber, that's a problem. I'm looking for appliance repair, can't do that. So it was clear it was a problem, right? And I also had access to something else just because I was at Google. So that may not always apply, but in my case it did. I went and looked, we have these anonymized query logs. So I could see what people were looking for. And so that's what I did. I said, are people looking for local services? And, I looked at the search logs and it was clear lots of people were looking for that. So I'd validated the problem. This was a real problem, right? The next step is to validate your solution. Does your solution actually solve that problem that the users have, right? And there are many ways to do it. You can go out and talk to your customers and say, I'm thinking of building this, will it solve it? But what I have learned is people often don't know what they want, right? So they'll say one thing, but they might actually do something different. So what I found the best way to validate your solution is to have them actually interact with your solution. right? And so there's this concept of an MVP, which is a minimum viable product. And really what that is the cheapest, smallest thing you could build to get feedback from your users, right? So in my case, for local search, what I did was I convinced another engineer to work with me. We quickly built a prototype. It took us about 5 days to build the prototype. And then I shared it with people and said, try it out. And I actually took it to my VP and said, try it out. And my VP was sure he had a query that prototype was going to fail on. So it turns out my VP is a telescope enthusiast, right? And so he put in the query ATM. Now, when I think of ATM, I think of a place where you get money. But it turns out an ATM is a very specialized piece of equipment for telescopes. So he put in that query. I was very nervous, but the prototype actually showed the 2 places within 50 miles where you could buy that. Right? And my VP was so impressed, he said, ship it. And the reason I'm telling this story is because I can't overemphasize the value of a cheap prototype in getting feedback from your customers. So I just want to share a couple of tools that have become very popular in the startup world, just in case you haven't come across them. The first is called the mission model canvas. And basically, it's a structured way of thinking about all the things you need to do right for your startup to succeed. The right-hand side is called effectively the desirability piece, right? And it's so useful that they've actually pulled that out into its own canvas. It's called the value prop canvas. And this basically is a structured way of figuring out just what I talked about, right? So on the right-hand side, you have all the pain points your customers told you. Your left-hand side is your solutions that you think will solve that solution. And when the left-hand side actually solves the right-hand side, that's kind of when you know you have product market fit. So just go to Google, look for value prop canvas, look for MMC. There's lots of information online. So I'm not going to go into details because there's YouTubes, there's everything there. Okay. So let's go to the second pillar. The one thing I've learned, the biggest thing, honestly, that I've taken away from my 20 years at Google is that it's all about the people. It really is. Obviously, your mission is critical. Like what you're working on, of course, that's really critical. But if you don't have the right set of people to help you, you're not going to be able to implement it. You really got to hire the best people you can and then take really good care of them and empower them and then let them do their thing. So now people often will, especially young startups would come and tell me, yep, that's easy for Google to say. You guys could had your pick. But really what I'm trying to say here is you want to hire the best people you can. So what that means is you need to make hiring a priority and put a lot of effort into it. Because if you have good people, then the rest of your job becomes dramatically easier because then they will pick up a lot of the work, right? So at Google, our philosophy was good people know good people. And so we implemented what we call referral-based hiring, which means we really encouraged our employees to refer their friends. Every time a friend of theirs, someone they referred got hired, they got a bonus, right? And then we made everybody participate in the interview process. So we basically, everybody had to undergo interview training and everybody had to help interview. And so that hiring, everybody understood was really important and we needed to find good people. And I think everybody can do that. That has nothing to do with Google. That works in pretty much, you could be a startup of 5 people. Even then, it's worth putting a lot of effort into hiring because that gives you a base then to grow from. Now, once you've hired these fantastic people, you've got to really treat them well, right? And one thing that I found worked really well, one thing that I think Google did really well was it encouraged grassroots efforts. So, so like, I'm going to talk about engineering because really I'm an engineer, but we didn't have a lot of processes in engineering when we started out. And so what that did was it encouraged us as engineers to create stuff when we felt like we needed it. And as a result of that, we only got useful processes put in, right? We didn't have random stuff. So one example was, when we grew to about 60 engineers, 70 engineers, I personally was finding it very hard to keep track of what everyone was doing. And so I started what I called Tech Talks, where every week I would, get a senior engineer and get him to talk about what they were working on. And I videotaped it so that every time a new hire came, all they had to do was watch the videos and then they were up to speed on all of engineering. And this became really popular. So, finally in about 3 years, we actually had a team of 30 people whose only job it was to organize talks. And it spread beyond engineering to the entire company. In fact, we'd started getting people from outside. So we got the Dalai Lama, we got brain specialists, we got people who are fantastic with elephants, pretty much everything. It's called Google Talks now, and we have something like 10 across the world. We'll have at every point in time, some part they had having a talk. And then the other thing is then, what I mean by get out of the way is really, if you let them trust your people, right? And they will really surprise you. But the one thing I learned the hard way to enable you to do that, right? To make sure that everybody's working on the right thing. What I realized is you have to keep mission front and center and figure out ways of doing that. Because, sometimes in day-to-day, people forget why they're doing what they're doing. So, for example, when I was hiring people for the travel team, I only hired people who are passionate about travel. But, in the day-to-day space, engineers are engineers. Sometimes they forget why we were doing what we were doing. I still remember, going into a meeting one day with some of my top engineers, and they were arguing about this really cool ML-based algorithm that would take at least a year to build. And so I suggested, guys, how about this heuristic? Why don't we do this? Yes, it's about 70% as good, but we could launch this in a month. And I was surprised they weren't excited because it wasn't a cool algorithm. They'd forgotten why we were building what we were building, right? And so what I did was I took my entire Mountain View team and I took them up to San Francisco, which is very popular with tourists. I took them to Fisherman's Wharf. I broke them into groups of 3. And I said, if you see anybody with a camera, that person has probably traveled to San Francisco from somewhere. Go talk to them. Ask them, how did you plan your trip? What worked? What was easy? What was hard? Just listen to them. And then we came back and met as a whole group and we brainstormed. And it was magical. Everybody was talking about to do this, how can we get. Nobody was talking about algorithms anymore. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is even with the smartest of peoples, sometimes you have to make sure that people are constantly, as a founder, mission is always on top of your head. But you need to make sure everybody is always remembering why you're doing what you're doing. Like in our case, the end goal was we really wanted to help our users plan their travel. And so periodically I had to make sure that they remember that was what it was about. And then the other thing is, it's really helpful if your team likes each other. So, and it's easy to do it. You don't have to do something very elaborate. What I used to do at Google with my team, travel team, was every Thursday we would meet for an hour and just drink beer and chat. And that created, strong bonds in the team. And the thing is, when your team likes each other, when you have bonds, then problems get solved really easily. So easy to do. You don't have to be elaborate. Spend some time thinking about that, making sure that happens. Okay, so let's talk about, I'm just checking on how I'm doing on time. I'm okay on time. Let's talk about pillar 3. So I honestly think that the laser focus on the user is why Google did so well. Everything we did, every product, every new feature, we were always evaluating it with, is this going to help our user? How is it going to help our user? So some learnings from that, right? First was do one thing at a time, right? Do one thing and do it really well. So at Google, we actually did one thing, right? We did search. And we really focused on making search well, right? So you come to Google, even today, what you see is that single search box, and you put in your query and you get the results. And we, even today, have a huge team focused on making that work really, really well behind the scenes, right? So we're all constantly iterating. We do auto spell correct, phrases, better page rank, whatever it takes. Lots of effort has been put to make search work really well. And that's why we are where we are. In the early days, we never even had to do any marketing. We got customers purely from word of mouth because it worked so well. The other thing is focus on your common case, figure out what's the most common thing your users do, and make that really easy, right? Remove any barriers, try not to have distractions there. So, but at the same time, you want to enable your power users because often they are the ones who are the influencers. So like we ended up building a lot of advanced search features, but we always put it away from the main path. The common path even today is you come to Google, you put in your search into that search box and you get results, right? The power users have other places to go and find, do phrase searches and whatever else they want to do. Even when we built new products like Google Images, Maps, News, we didn't force our users to go to news.google.com or images.google.com. I mean, they could if they wanted to, but we made sure it worked in the common case, which was the web search. So you could go to web search and just type in photos or roses, and we knew you were looking for images, and we'd bring them into that same search result. The other thing that we always did was we were constantly iterating, building new features, building new products, making them better all the time. And so what we ended up doing was we had a lot of tools to help with that. And I'm going to talk about two of the ones that I think are most useful. The first is A/B testing. A/B testing is basically when you test a new thing against the old, right? And so pretty much any feature, any new thing we launched, we would only launch it partially, like maybe in one data center, and then compare what our users did with the new version versus the old version, and only launched it if it was actually better for our users. And this is such a core part of our culture, and it was so useful. We built lots of tools to do it, but honestly, it doesn't have to be very fancy. It has to be very elaborate. You just need to figure out, whatever you're launching, a simple way to first test it against the old system and only do it if it's new. And that, this A/B testing saved us from launching bad things for our users so many times. One very vivid example I remember is when we launched predictive search. So predictive search is, when you go to Google and you start typing your query and then we start showing you suggestions to say, is that what you're trying to do, right? And when we launched that was really successful. We found our users could get to what they were looking for. I think it was, I forget, 20, 30% faster. I forget the numbers, but Anyways, but because it worked so well, someone decided, let's make it work even better. Let's personalize it to you. And not just to where you are, let's personalize it to what you have been looking for in the last couple of days, right? And so we put that out. But when we tested it, it was an absolute disaster. And we started actually losing users. And we realized that our users come to Google for a particular purpose, right? So if I'm going to Google today, like I could have been searching for, the best digital camera yesterday, but if I'm going today and I'm looking for how best to prune roses, if you show me a suggestion, best digital camera, it's just a distraction. I want roses right now, right? And, in hindsight, it's totally obvious, but we did actually build that. And then we did not launch it. So another really important process is user research. And I think I talked about, effectively I talked about it earlier too. It's the whole trust what I do, not what I say. And so every time, we build a product, build a new feature, we will bring our users in and watch them actually use it, right? So now at Google, we had very sophisticated user research labs, and we did eye tracking and all of that. But it doesn't need to be that fancy. All you need to do is get some of your potential customers to use your product and watch them doing it. So for example, in the early days of image search, I took my teams once and I broke them into groups of 3 again and sent them to people's homes, obviously with permissions and all that stuff, but to watch them use image search. And, one of them went to this house of an interior designer and watched her use it. And they realized she often used images to find, special, she wanted a particular cushion to go with a particular white sofa. And they realized just having a simple color filter would save her a lot of time, because she was often looking for, I want an orange cushion now because I have this white sofa, right? Other teams came back with, learnings that, people often used Google to build their presentations. And they often wanted, they wanted either a photo, or they wanted a logo, or they wanted, graphics, cartoons. And so, at the end of that, when we looked at what everybody had learned, we ended up building image search filters where you could restrict the results either by photo, by size, by color, logo, whatever it was. And that was, one of the most popular features, additional features we launched. Okay, so let's talk about the 4th pillar, culture. Culture is a little hard to define. I mean, in some sense, it's the sum of the behavior of the entire organization. But it's really important to think about culture very early on, because, once culture is set, it's really hard to change. So at Google, we were focused at culture right from the beginning, right? This whole laser focus on the user, that was part of our culture. Focusing on innovation and excellence, that was part of our culture. We had, what we called a moonshot culture. And by moonshot, I mean, aiming high, aiming for the moon, right? And so we encourage people to have stretch goals, right? And the expectation was, because it's a stretch goal, you may not always achieve it. You might get to like 70%, but that was okay. In fact, our founder, Larry Page, he used to say, if you hit 100% of your goals all the time, you're probably not being ambitious enough. But the nice thing about having that kind of a culture, it really led to innovation because it encouraged us to take risks, right? One thing I found that often holds people back from being really innovative is this fear of failure. But you can't have innovation without failure, right? And so to encourage innovation, you really need to embrace failure. So at Google X was our moonshot lab. Their job was to come up with the next big thing. And so they had this process they called rapid evaluation. And the idea was when you came up with an idea, their job was to find ways to make it fail as quickly as possible so that if it didn't fail, then they knew it had a high chance of success. But to encourage that kind of behavior, they really had to celebrate failure, right? And so actually Google X, they would throw a party every time they shut down a product. Okay, so that's a little extreme. But the point I'm trying to make is if you want innovation, you also have to be okay with, in fact, you need to embrace failure because that's the only way you can encourage people to take a risk. The other part of our culture was this, we're constantly investing, reinvesting, building new features, building new products all the time. And so we had our philosophy was, we used to call it the 70-20-10 philosophy. And so the idea was 70% of your resources are working on your day-to-day bread and butter, right? 20% of your resources are working on something that's, in the near future, a new thing that you think will launch pretty soon in the next maybe 6 months. But 10% of your resources need to be working on something that's very risky, that's a long shot, but if it succeeds, can have a huge impact. I remember when I start, and people often say, yeah, that's okay. Google can do it because Google's really big. But this is something we always did even when we were small. So when I started image search, right, initially there were 3 of us who built it. For the first few years, I had a team of just about 7 people, so not very big. But even then, I had one of my top engineers, I told him, spend half your time looking into computer vision. So half a resource, right? Not that much. And, when it started having some potential, I added more to it. And at that time, that was a really long shot because computer vision was still in the academic world. It wasn't at a place where it could actually be used in a product. But that long shot, that investment paid off. In 2.5 years, we managed to get it to a place where we could actually take computer vision signals and incorporate it into ranking. And so when we launched this new form of ranking, suddenly the quality of results became dramatically better. And we became miles ahead of our nearest competitor. So, and now actually Google has this big effort of computer vision, hundreds of people, and we use it not just in image search, but in photos, in YouTube, even in Google Health. So I know, especially when you're small, you're like, can I really afford, I need everybody working on that 70. Can I really afford, not to have that? But you have to figure out how much resources you feel comfortable with, but it's good to have an eye on the future. And I think the reason Google has been so successful is because we always did that. So value system is another key core part of culture, right? And at Google, like right in the early days, we had, we believed we had do no evil as part of our value system. And so that made it really easy for us to make decisions, when there was a little bit of a dilemma because, we knew our value system. So for example, in the early days when we were just starting ads, we were debating, should we take ads from gun manufacturers, alcohol, porn? And we're like, you know what, it might be a lot of money, but no, we're not going to do that because we don't want to do that for our users, right? It was clear, it didn't align with our value system. Another part of our value system, at least at Google, was transparency from the very early days. And I think for any young startup, you should really think about being as transparent as you can. In our case, we used to have a meeting every Friday. The entire company would meet on Friday. We'd call it, Thank God It's Friday. But the idea was at these meetings, any employee could ask our founders, Larry and Sergey, any question about pretty much anything, and they would answer it, right? And they also would share all our revenue numbers, upcoming sales, leads, everything. Well, at some point we had to stop doing the revenue numbers because when we got close to IPO, we couldn't. But still, the idea was to share as much as you can. And you know what it did was it gave us all this sense of ownership in the company, feeling like, yeah, we are Google. Google's part of us. Let's do what we can, to make Google successful. Scaling. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay, I think I'm okay. I wanted to show, Google has these pretty famous by now crayon graphs, which I think are really cool. So I wanted to show it partly because I think they're really cool, but partly also because I think it very nicely captures everything that goes into scaling. So it's not just about, how many users do you have, what's your revenue? It's about, if you want to scale successfully, it's got to be about the people, the technology, the products you build, the partnerships, and the culture. So let me quickly just show you the graphs and we'll talk about it more. So what this was one of the engineers very early on started plotting our queries per day, right? So the graph shows you the queries per day. And it just organically, people started putting all kinds of stuff in it, right? So when people joined, we would put that in. So for example, you can see this is the day I joined. When we built a new data center to scale, that showed up on this. New partners, every time we got new partners, that traffic showed up on this. When we launched a new index, a larger index, a better index, that showed up on this. This was the day we launched image search. Sorry, I'm pointing with my finger. And even cultural things like ski trips showed up in it. I'm not showing this saying, you guys should build this. I just think it's a really cool thing. But let's talk about scaling. So as Google grew, right, we found we needed to introduce a lot more process, right? So teams, hierarchies, scheduled meetings, whatever. But the thing with process and structure, it's kind of funny. You have to get it just right. Too much, and you stifle creativity. And too little, and you end up with chaos. So really you want that, what I call managed chaos, where you're still nurturing creativity, but you have enough, process and systems so that you don't delve into chaos. So let's talk about the first one. How do you nurture creativity? So at Google, we had this thing that we called 20%. And the idea was any employee, any engineer, I'm saying engineer because, that I do engineering, but could take 20% of their time and work on something that was not their main project, right? As long as it was something that had the potential of being good for Google, right? And, a lot of our early products came through 20%. Gmail was a 20% project. Local search was my 20% project. But the thing is, as a company grew bigger, I think 20% doesn't work so well. Most people really can't do that. A tool that I found worked much better was hackathons, right? And so, like with my travel team, every 6 months, we would take a week off. The entire team would take a week off from whatever they were doing, and we would hold a hackathon. And the idea was people could pair up with anybody they wanted, didn't have to be people in their specific team, and explore new ideas, new products that could make travel better, right? And at the end of the week, we would meet and see what everybody had done. And, and sometimes we got some great ideas out of it. But it wasn't just about that. It really got the creative juices flowing, and it made everybody, feel empowered and feel like they had a stake in it. I think hackathons are great for nurturing creativity. So of course we, as we were growing, we had started investing in systems, but the one thing that I think worked really well and can work for any startup, every organization I think should use this, is OKRs, right? And OKRs are objectives and key results. And I'll just explain it because I can't see you guys, so I can't tell if you know what they are. So really the way that works is you come up with every quarter or for the year, you come up with 3 to 5 objectives of what you're trying to get done that quarter or that year, right? And for each objective, you have 3 to 5 key results. And you want your key results to be very tangible. They need to be almost quantitative, ideally, so that you can measure that you're making progress towards that objective. So let me give you an example. So one of the years on travel team, our objective was to really help, make our users satisfied with our search, right? Make search work better for them, travel search. And our objective was improve user satisfaction is what we called it. And so the key results were, one was launch personalized ranking. Second was increase the user happiness score from 65 to 75, right? Very tangible, launch this, we know it's going to happen, and we know it's taking us a step towards it. I think OKRs work really well because they make sure that the entire company is aligned, mission aligned, right? You could do it at any level. At Google, we did it at the company level, departments, teams, projects, and even individuals had that. And I can talk more about this if folks are interested in the Q&A. But I think it's a really useful tool for both for the entire company to know what people, what the company is trying to do, and time, because I'm getting close to time, metrics. So I think metrics are really important and deserve their own. Can people still hear me? That they deserve their own section, right? Especially, I think they're important right from the beginning, because it's a good way of figuring out, are you going in the right direction? But especially when you scale, metrics become really important, right? And having the right metric is really important because whatever you measure, that's what your teams are going to work on. So for example, at Google, for travel team, right? Initially, our metric was our top metric. We had a bunch of metrics, but our top metric was number of users, right? And so all our projects focused on how do we increase the number of people coming to our sites, to our products and using travel search. And it was really successful. In 12 months, we got to 25 million monthly active users, which is a record in the travel space. But nobody was asking, our mission was to help our users plan their travel. And we realized we hadn't really looked into that. And so we came up with a new metric. We called it the user happiness score to see. And when we used that metric, we realized one of our core user journeys wasn't very good at helping our users plan their travel. It actually had a happiness score of just 65. And so we made user happiness score our top metric. And within a year,
Видимо, связь с интернетом немного была потеряна у Радхики Мальпани, но это ничего. Я уверен, что она через какое-то время к нам вернется. Дорогие друзья, я вам еще раз напомню, что сегодня у нас первый день фестиваля Go Viral 2020. У нас сегодня уже было 2 лекции от 2 keynote-спикеров. Это Брэндон Эндрюс, который рассказывал о том, как бизнес выживает в современном мире во время и после пандемии. А также был Самсон Безмятежный, который рассказывал о технологиях виртуальной реальности и о том, как эта технология может быть применима в различных сферах нашей жизни, от не только игровой, но и другими сферами, такими как медицина, журналистика, сегодня мы это тоже обсудили. Сейчас у нас была лекция Я надеюсь, что она вернется, но если нет, у нас сейчас была лекция от Радхики Мальпани. Она рассказывала о своем 20-летнем опыте работы в компании Google, делилась, можно сказать, такими внутренними вещами о том, как они строили свои команды, как они развивали те или иные продукты, на что они делали упор. Она очень много рассказывала о том, что одной из самых важных частей, помимо выбора миссии компании, то, чем эта компания хочет заниматься, это инвестиции в людей. То, что люди и команды, которые занимаются различными продуктами, это чуть ли не самый важный аспект. И вторым, следом сразу за людьми, идет построение команд, правильных команд, людей, чтобы они, работая друг с другом, смогли достичь всех целей, поставленных руководством этой компании. Ну что ж, дорогие друзья, презентация Радхики Мальпани подошла к концу. Сейчас я хотел бы вам всем напомнить, что у вас у всех есть возможность... Радхика вернулась, отлично, замечательно. Сейчас мы вернемся к ней и сможем с ней еще немного поговорить. Radhika?
Yes, sorry, I something happened. I got kicked out. I'm calling you on my phone now.
Anyways, it's really good to hear you again. You can either continue on your presentation, or I can ask some questions from our participants and users that are really eager to hear your opinion on several topics.
Let's ask questions. Where did you lose me? At what slide?
So it was a slide when you were talking, it was like around 6 minutes ago, not that long ago, like 5 to 6 minutes ago. One of the last slides you talked about metrics. You talked that user happiness was higher than just number of users that you're gonna...
That was pretty much it. I just had a wrap-up slide, so it's fine.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was really interesting. It gave us little insights on how Google, worked within. And our participants had several questions. There's a question from Kazakhstan. The user says, "Good evening or good morning to you. Is it possible to create an innovative product by yourself, or does it always have to be a teamwork?"
I think it depends on what you're doing, right? Initially, I mean, like I said, local search, I got one person to work with me, but I could have done it alone. I think often when you're starting something out, it's usually maybe you convince one or two people to do it. It's when you want to really scale, right? Then it's hard for a person to do it by themselves. Then you need a team. Mm-hmm. But I think most startups start with 1-2 people who have a great idea, and that's what I call the prototype, and you go and build something, and then you test it, right? And it's only when you want to make it bigger and have more users, then there's a lot more code to build, lots more stuff to do, then you need more people, but not for the initial phase. Initial phase usually is 1 or 2 people. You don't get innovation with a large team.
Yeah.
You get innovation with 1 or 2 people. The large team is how you productize it and stabilize it.
Yeah. Okay, great. There's also one more, not one more, but there's several questions. Another question is, a lot of different countries are trying to create or start their own Silicon Valleys. What do you think should be, the best ways to make IT startups in the country, grow more? What are the best comfortable environment for IT startups to grow in the country?
So a couple of things, really for IT startups to work, first of all, it's like what I said earlier, it's people. So you need talent, which means you need good universities to really train people. The other piece then becomes resources. Money, right? So you need some kind of a reasonable VC industry that can invest in these startups to help them work. So I think the way you get, you want these, if you're trying to create a Silicon Valley, you want them, kind of concentrated in a place, because then you want easy flow amongst different companies. You don't want to have people locked into a company. You want to create, like if I was running in that city and it was my job, I would create opportunities for people to network so that they can exchange ideas, meet each other and spark creativity, organize hackathons. So like I know, like for example, Berkeley used to organize city hackathons and get people together where you meet other people who are kind of like-minded, who care about a particular area, and so that you can work off of each other and take something and, you go to it and say, oh, I have this idea. And somebody else, oh my God, I had something like that too. Let's talk about it. And you start brainstorming and now you have something real. So you have to create that. You have to create that culture of innovation. You have to make sure that there's a good pipeline of talent, and you need to have a